Hi, I welcome you all for this video. I am K. Lakshmanan, Assistant Professor from the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, Hindustan College of Engineering and Technology, Coimbatore. In this video, I am going to explain about architecture of servlets. First, we will discuss about Servlet. Servlets are Java programs that run on a Java-enabled web browser or application server. Usually, they are used to handle the request obtained from the web server. Then it processes the request and produces the responses. Again, it sends a response back to the web server. Now we will discuss about architecture of servlet. Servlet architecture is designed to efficiently handle the client requests and generate responses using Java based components. The architecture involves the interaction of components like clients, web servers, servlet containers, servlets and resources. This is the architecture of servlet. There is a communication between web server, web service and container. Let us discuss about each and every component in detail. First we will discuss about client. It primarily works as a medium that sends out HTTP requests over the web server. The web server generates a response based on some processing in the servlet and the client further processes the response. So this is called client. Typically, client is an end user application, that is web browser. Then web server. It is an important thing. Primary job of web server is to process the request and responses that a user sends over time. It maintains how a web user would be able to access the files that has been hosted over the server. There are two types of web servers: static web server and dynamic web server. Now we will discuss about static web server. A static web server serves fixed content that does not change in response to user interactions or other conditions. The content is pre-generated and stored in files such as HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images and other forms. When a client requests a service, the server retrieves the file from its storage and sends it to the client without any modifications. Now we will discuss about dynamic web server. It generates content on the fly based on the user's request, interactions or other conditions. This involves server-side processing, often using server-side scripting languages like PHP, Python, Ruby or Java. Next we will discuss about web container. So it is responsible for communicating with the servlets. A web container sits at the server side, managing and handling all the requests that are coming in either from the servlets or from the JSP page. Two primary tasks of web container are managing the servlet lifecycle and URL mapping. Next we will see the another component, servlet. A Java class that extends HTTP servlet and overrides methods such as doGet and doPost to handle HTTP requests. It processes the client request, interact with necessary resources and generates a response. Now we will discuss about the workflow of servlet architecture. First, client request. The client sends an HTTP request to the web server. This request includes details like the URL, request parameters and headers. The second stage of workflow is web server receives the request. which is the web server checks the URL of the incoming request and determines if the request should be handled by the servlet. If the request is mapped to a servlet, the web server forwards request to the servlet container. The next stage is servlet container processing. The servlet container checks if the servlet instance is already loaded. If not, it loads the servlet class and creates an instance of the servlet. The servlet container then calls the init method of the servlet to perform any initialization tasks. The next stage is request handling. The servlet container invokes the service method of the servlet, passing the HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response objects. The service method determines the type of HTTP request and dispatches it to the appropriate method. The next stage is servlet processing. The servlet processes the request, which may include reading request parameters, interacting with resources, and performing business logic. The servlet generates a response typically in the form of HTTP, HTML, XML, and etc. Next stage is response generation. The servlet writes the response using HTTP servlet response object. This can include setting response headers, status codes, and writing the response body. The next stage is response sent to the client. The servlet container sends the response back to the web server. The web server forwards the response to the client. The final stage is servlet destruction. When the servlet is no longer needed or the web server is shutting down, the servlet container calls the destroy method of the servlet to perform any cleanup tasks. By understanding this architecture, developers can develop robust, scalable, and efficient web applications by leveraging the lifecycle methods and the servlet containers capabilities. Developers can create dynamic web applications that meet modern standards and user expectations. Thank you all for listening.